The first sound that reached me that morning wasn't birdsong or the wind in the pines.
Looks like the decision's
It
been
was a
made.
cry. A sound so thin, so broken, it made the hair rise on my neck. Not a howl, not a growl, but something caught between a sob and a plea. I froze on the gravel path outside Pinecrest Station, the steam from my coffee cooling in the air. Then I saw her. She emerged from the fog like a shadow torn from the trees. Broad shoulders, a coat of mottled earth and ash. Golden eyes that should have burned with wild pride, but now carried something else entirely. Desperation. A bobcat, full grown, a mother, but she wasn't hunting. She wasn't hiding. She was pacing, back and forth, her tail lashing like a whip of grief, her head lifting every few seconds to send out that broken cry. And with every sound, my chest tightened, because I knew that call. 3 days earlier, we had found 2 kittens tucked in the corner of an abandoned grain shed, sharp-eyed, trembling, but far too healthy to be orphans. I had wondered then, gnawed at myself in the quiet hours. What story had torn them from where they belonged? Now the answer stood in front of me. Unraveling in the mist, she had been searching, starving, calling into nights where no answer came. And she had not given up. My hands shook as I set down my thermos. From my work bag, I pulled the old flannel cloth I had wrapped around the smallest kitten, the one who wouldn't eat unless she was swaddled tight. The cloth still carried that faint scent of milk and fur, of home. I lifted it into the wind. The bobcat stopped. Her golden eyes locked onto mine, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. There was no rage in her stare, no fear, only a raw, pleading question. It was the same look I had seen in war zones, in orphan wards, in the faces of those who had lost too much and dared to hope for one last mercy. And in that moment I understood. This was no rescue anymore. This was a family trying to stitch itself back together. I took one step backward. She mirrored me, 15 feet apart, moving as if guided by something older than language. The cabin door loomed ahead. Behind it, 2 frightened kittens. My throat burned as I whispered into the fog, not a command, but a prayer. You came for them, didn't you, Mama? She didn't run. She didn't bare her teeth. She only stared, waiting for me to open the door. The door hinges groaned as I pushed it open, the sound too loud in a hallway that suddenly felt like sacred ground. Warm air drifted out. Cedar, coffee, the faint sting of disinfectant, and wrapped itself around the cold mountain mist. Behind me, the bobcat stood at the threshold, every muscle pulled taut, every instinct warning her to flee. Then it happened. A cry, thin, wavering but fierce with recognition, rose from deep inside the quarantine room. One kitten, then the other. Their voices overlapped in a frantic chorus that seemed to tear through the walls. The mother bobcat's ears snapped forward. Her body shuddered as if struck by lightning. She stepped onto the wooden boards, claws clicking once, then again. The hallway swallowed us both. I raised the flannel cloth higher, letting the familiar scent drift back to her. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely keep hold. But I didn't dare let it fall. She moved behind me, silent but unstoppable. Each step the weight of a vow she had carried across nights of hunger and loss. The light through the hallway window broke the fog, spilling across her coat in shards of gold. For a heartbeat, the world looked like stained glass. And I thought, if faith had a shape, it might look like this. From upstairs came a gasp, a clatter of ceramic, an intern dropping a mug. The bobcat froze. Her tail stiffened, her breath caught, her body coiled with indecision. Then her eyes found mine again. Not wild, not tame, just asking me, is it safe? I didn't move, didn't speak. I simply walked on, slow and steady. When we reached the quarantine room, the sound from inside was unbearable. tiny bodies hurling themselves against the mesh, cries climbing higher and higher, desperate and demanding. I fumbled with the keys. My fingers wouldn't stop shaking. The lock finally clicked, and I turned once to look at her. She was closer than ever, her chest heaving, her golden eyes burning with a pain so raw it made my throat close. The door swung open. The kittens exploded forward, scrambling, colliding, throwing themselves at the wire so hard it rattled against the frame. And the mother, she broke. With a guttural cry pulled from the base of her spine, she rushed to them, her face shoved through the mesh, her tongue sweeping over tiny heads, her paws clutching them close as if to weld them back into her body. They climbed her shoulders, bit her ears, pressed themselves into her chest. I staggered back, my vision blurred. It was chaos, it was wild, it was unrestrained, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The room dissolved into noise and motion, a storm of fur and sound that no camera could ever truly capture. The kittens cried as though pouring out every hour of absence, their little paws scraping her cheeks, their tails whipping like frantic signals of joy. And the mother? She answered each cry with a tremor of her own, licking, nudging, curling herself around them in a desperate attempt to assure her heart they were real. I pressed a hand to my mouth, because what rose in my throat was too much to let out. Tears blurred my sight, but I didn't need eyes to understand what was happening. This was not survival. This was resurrection. Behind me, I sensed movement. Faith was there in the doorway, hands clamped to her face, shoulders quaking as silent sobs overtook her. Jeremy stood just behind, his phone in his shaking grip. But his expression said this wasn't about views or headlines. He was bearing witness, needing proof for himself that moments like this could exist in a world so often cruel. Even old Ranger Thomas had appeared, his bulk filling the corner, jaw tight, eyes shining with a wetness he'd deny until his dying day. No one spoke. They didn't have to, because this wasn't the kind of moment words could touch. The Bobcat sank to the floor, gathering both kittens beneath her chest, curling her body around them like a fortress. She groomed them with slow, reverent strokes, pausing only to nose their sides, to breathe them in as if scent alone could stitch the torn days back together. The kittens, exhausted from their frenzy, pressed into her warmth, their cries fading into hiccuping chirps until finally, silence filled the room again. It was the silence of completion. Finally, Thomas cleared his throat, rough and uneven. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Well," he muttered softly, "looks like the decision's been made for us." I nodded once, unable to trust my voice. Because he was right. The rules, the manuals, the endless pages of procedure, all of it crumbled beneath the weight of what we had just seen. And in that silence, heavy with awe, the work began. Faith was the first to move, her hands still trembling as she wiped her cheeks. She slipped away to the staff room and returned with a clipboard clutched to her chest, pages fluttering in the draft like nervous birds. Without a word, she began scribbling. Forms, notes, anything to give this miracle a paper trail. Jeremy disappeared down the hallway, his boots slapping against the floor. And minutes later, the sound of the garage door rattling open told me he was prepping the transport crate. Even Thomas, who usually barked orders like a foreman, had his radio pressed close, murmuring to the park vet with a tone so soft it didn't sound like him at all. His free hand tapped out a text to the relocation officer, as though speed alone could keep this fragile balance from collapsing. No one asked permission. No one waited for clearance. It was as though the sight of that wild family reunited had rewritten the law inside all of us. By the time Dr. Avery strode in, hair still damp from the mist, the place was humming like an orchestra without a conductor. She didn't waste time with questions. She knelt by the enclosure, her eyes sharp but her posture low and unthreatening, as though acknowledging the sovereignty of the mother pressed tight around her kittens. "She's thin," Avery murmured, studying the bobcat's ribs. Then her gaze slid to the kittens, fat and fierce, as they squirmed beneath their mother's chin. "But look at them. Loud, strong. That's the best sign we could ask for." A laugh escaped me, raw, shaky, but real. "We were just keeping them warm for her," I said. Around the wide wooden table, we unrolled the park map until it covered the grainy varnish. My finger traced the path from the abandoned shed where the kittens had been found to the overgrown creek bed near Cinder Ridge. "She brought them down from here, I'd bet," I said, pointing to the shaded ridge line. "That thunderstorm last Thursday. Maybe coyotes. Something spooked them. They got separated in the chaos. If we're lucky, she'll know her way back. It's still her ground." Thomas leaned over the map, frown carved deep. "And if she doesn't stay? If she bolts for good?" I looked past the paper, out the window to the dark line of trees. The wilderness had taken so much from me over the years. Friends, animals, more quiet griefs than I cared to count. But today, it had given something back. "I think she'll take them where they were always meant to be," I said quietly. And that was never here. Saying goodbye was harder than I had braced myself for. In just a handful of days, those two kittens had woven themselves into the fabric of our lives, crying when the lights clicked off at night, pawing at the towels Faith carefully folded into their pen, staring up at us with eyes too wild and too innocent all at once. Their tiny heartbeats had become part of the station's rhythm, tucked in between the hiss of the coffee pot and the crackle of radios. Letting them go wasn't just protocol. It was right. But it still hurt like hell. We moved through the hallway as if carrying something holy. The crate felt heavier than it was, not from the weight of the bobcat pressed against her young, but from the gravity of what it meant. Inside, her golden eyes never left us. Steady, burning, protective. She didn't lunge, didn't fight. She trusted us. And somehow that trust only deepened the ache. The Jeep's suspension groaned when we set the crate in the back. My hands lingered too long on the latch, unwilling to let go. Thomas's throat clearing broke the moment. I stepped back, heart hammering in a way no mountain storm had ever managed. The road climbed into the forest, narrow and cruel on the tires. The station vanished behind a bend, swallowed by pine and fog. I gripped the wheel too tight, jaw clenched against the silence. Beside me, Dr. Avery braced one hand against the crate each time the Jeep jolted. For miles, she said nothing, letting the forest fill the space instead. Finally, her voice cut through, quiet but firm. "You holding up?" I kept my eyes locked on the trail, but my throat burned. "I've done this work most of my life," I said. "I've carried animals to safety. I've carried them to graves. But I've never once felt like I was the one being trusted, chosen." For the first time since we left, she turned to me. Her expression held both steadiness and something that felt like faith. "She knew who to follow," Avery said simply. The Jeep rattled on, each turn carrying us closer to the hidden clearing. An untouched patch of earth where no signs stood, no trails led, no picnic benches waited. A place that didn't belong to us at all. A place where a wild family might finally be made whole again. The Jeep finally rolled to a stop at the mouth of the clearing, engine ticking as it cooled in the sharp morning air. For a moment, none of us moved. The forest was holding its breath, waiting. I stepped out first, boots crunching on pine needles. The clearing lay ahead like a secret the world had been saving. Sloping earth, moss-covered stones, and a spring-fed creek whispering beneath a curtain of frost. It felt untouched, eternal, the kind of place where beginnings belonged. Dr. Avery joined me, her face softened by something almost reverent. "This is it," she murmured, though the trees hardly needed her to say so. We circled to the back of the Jeep. Inside the crate, the mother bobcat had risen, her body taut, her tail swishing in restless arcs. The kittens pressed against her, their noses working furiously, their tiny bodies vibrating with excitement. They knew. Somehow, they knew. Jeremy and Faith appeared minutes later, flushed from hiking the last stretch, radios and medkits slung across their backs. No one raised their voice. We all moved like people inside a chapel, every sound too sharp, every breath too loud. Together, we lowered the crate to the ground at the edge of the tree line. I crouched beside it, my hand resting on the latch. My chest ached with the weight of what came next. For years, I'd opened cages for animals who might never walk free again. But this wasn't just opening a door. This was letting go of grief, of comfort, of the illusion that they had ever been ours to keep. Dr. Avery knelt beside me. Her voice was soft but steady. "Do you want to be the one?" I nodded, though my throat was too tight for words. My hand trembled as I whispered, barely audible even to myself, "You know where to go. You've always known." The latch clicked. For a long breath, nothing happened. Then, with a grace that sent a shiver through me, the mother stepped out. Slow, soundless, as though the earth itself had been holding her place. At the edge of the shadows, she paused, turned back, and fixed me with eyes I will never forget. They weren't tame. They weren't thankful. They were knowing. Behind her, the kittens spilled out in a tumble of paws and tails, bounding and circling before darting back to press against her legs. One let out a tiny mew. She answered with a low, tender chirrup, and then, without ceremony, they slipped into the pines. Gone. Just like that. I stayed kneeling long after the forest had swallowed them. The ache in my knees was nothing compared to the hollow pulling at my chest. Around me, the clearing fell utterly still, as if the earth itself was honoring the departure. Letting go had always been part of this work, but this time felt different. Because this wasn't just about returning wild to wild. It was about returning a piece of a broken soul back to where it belonged. Faith stepped closer, her hand light on my shoulder. Her voice trembled, but she didn't try to fill the silence. "You okay?" I swallowed hard. My words scraped out like gravel. Sometimes you care for something you were never meant to keep. And when it leaves, it takes a piece of you with it. She squeezed my shoulder once and let the quiet speak for itself. We moved with slow reverence, packing the crate back into the Jeep. Jeremy coiled the ropes he hadn't needed, his hands clumsy, his face blotched from holding back tears. Thomas stood with his radio lowered, his usual iron voice nowhere to be found. Dr. Avery simply stared at the tree line, her lips moving soundlessly. Whether it was a prayer or a promise, I couldn't tell. As we turned away, I cast one last glance at the woods. Nothing stirred. No flash of fur, no gleam of eyes. But it didn't feel empty. Somehow, it felt whole. The next morning, frost laced the railing of the station porch. I stood with a steaming mug between my palms, watching mist cling to the treetops. The silence pressed in, but it wasn't absence. It was the hush that follows something sacred. I pulled on my boots and let my legs carry me down toward the old grain shed where the kittens had first been found. The rising sun painted stripes of gold across the dirt. That's when I saw them. Tracks, fresh. One large set, sure and steady. Two smaller ones dancing around it, crossing over each other in a wild, joyful pattern. They lingered near the shed, then curved back into the woods. Not hurried, not panicked, just passing through. I crouched and laid my fingers gently in the print, half afraid it would vanish under my touch. My throat tightened. They had come back, just for a moment, just to leave a sign, and that was enough. I stayed crouched there for a long while, the morning light crawling slowly across the ground. Every breath of wind carried the faintest hope that I might hear them again. A twig snapping, a chirp that didn't belong to any bird, but the forest remained quiet, as if it wanted me to carry only the tracks, not the sight. When I finally rose, the ache in my knees followed me back to the station. Inside, life had already moved on. Phones rang, the printer chattered. Trail camera footage flickered across monitors, showing deer nosing at salt licks and coyotes prowling fence lines. Ordinary things. And yet, woven through it all, something extraordinary was happening. Jeremy sat at the desk, phone in his hand, his face pale with disbelief. "It's everywhere," he murmured. The video, shaky, grainy, full of gasps and sobs, of the mother bobcat reuniting with her kittens had already raced across the internet. 600,000 views, comments pouring in. Faith restored, crying at my desk, a miracle in a world that's lost its way. People were calling it proof, a reminder, a gift. But for me, it wasn't about the numbers, or the flood of strangers' tears through glowing screens. It was about that single look. The moment when her eyes met mine, and I understood what she was saying without a word. "You have what I need most, and I trust you to give it back." I had. Not because it was safe, not because the manual told me so, but because it was right. That evening, as the dusk stretched its long shadows across the porch, I picked up the small carving someone had left on my desk days before. A bobcat, hand-carved, mid-step, head lifted as if listening. The wood felt warm from the day's sun, smooth beneath my fingertips. I held it up to the fading light and whispered into the silence, "Run far. Stay wild. Don't look back." Then I set it on the windowsill, where the moonlight would always find it, just in case she ever passed by again. Just in case she needed to know that someone still remembered.